Hey, everybody, and welcome to another deep dive.
Always exciting.
Yeah, definitely. This one is actually a huge shout out to senior technical writer Curt Robbins.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, for suggesting we do a deep dive on this topic, which I think is really going to hit home for a lot of, technical writers, documentation specialists, IT pros out there. We're going to be diving into When the Docs Are an Afterthought by the old tech writer, published on Medium on August 22nd, 2024.
Catchy title.
It is, right? And it's a really fascinating look at kind of what happens when, documentation gets the short end of the stick, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a familiar problem for many of us, I think. This article kind of cleverly breaks it down into like 7 signs that you're working in a documentation afterthought zone.
Yeah, definitely. I thought that was a really clever way to frame the conversation. What really stood out to you when you were reading through it?
Well, the first one, no documentation specific standards,
Yeah,
really resonated with me.
that one really hit home for me too. The article kind of points out that while companies might have branding guidelines, a lot of times they lack specific rules for technical writing.
It's true.
So it's like, you're left to figure it out on your own. It's kind of like the Wild West in a way.
And it's no wonder that that can be so frustrating, for writers because without those clear standards, trying to maintain consistency and quality across your documentation can become like a constant uphill battle.
Yeah, definitely.
The author actually suggests, looking at some more established style guides if you don't have one, like the Chicago Manual of Style, or even borrowing from some of the big tech giants like Apple, Microsoft, Google. Find what works for your team and just make it your Bible.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to, kind of have that single source of truth. And that actually leads perfectly into, I think, the next sign that they highlight, which is lack of collaboration.
Oh, yeah.
The article kind of paints this picture of writers working in silos. And, they only really come together when something goes wrong, like layoffs or, there's a reorganization happening.
Yeah, that's not a good recipe.
Not a good recipe at all.
And the author emphasizes how vital, regular communication is, for technical writers, like
Right.
team meetings, peer reviews.
Yeah.
Having a system in place for peer review, I think, is so essential because, imagine a fresh pair of eyes catching errors or, suggesting a clearer way to explain something really complex.
Yeah.
These are things that can easily slip past even the most seasoned writer.
Oh, for sure.
Right. And it also, they encourage teams to kind of divide work, strategically based on individual strengths. It's about leveraging everybody's, expertise to create the best possible documentation.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as you were saying that. It's kind of like working smarter, not harder. And that ties into, I think, the third sign that they highlight, which is absent schedules and planning. It's common to have deadlines, but there's often no clear breakdown of tasks and deliverables along the way.
Right.
So it's like, you have this kind of end goal in mind, but you're not really sure how you're going to get there. And that lack of structure, I think, makes it really tough to manage your workload and to kind of stay on track.
Definitely. And what's interesting here is that the author doesn't just lament the problem. They offer a solution.
Right.
Take control, create your own documentation plan that's detailed and schedule and get input from, everybody involved and make it your North Star. This is going to empower you to kind of manage the process proactively, and it gives you concrete, documentation for tracking progress and communicating with management.
Yeah, such a good point. I love the proactive approach.
Yeah.
Now, this next sign, this one's a real budget buster scrounging for software licenses.
Yeah.
We all know good documentation software can be expensive, and a lot of times the budget just isn't there.
This is where things get really strategic, I think. The author suggests, obtain basic licenses for most of the writers, but invest in a premium support package for one person.
Oh, that's interesting.
To kind of act as a central hub for expert assistance while, also being mindful of budget constraints.
Yeah, that's a really clever way, I think, to kind of maximize your resources. Making sure everybody has the tools they need to do their job effectively, but then still having that access to, that high-level support when those inevitable tricky situations pop up,
Exactly.
right? And speaking of tricky situations, the article then dives into a frustration that I think we've all probably experienced, spending more time on workarounds than on actual writing. You
Yeah.
know, battling layout issues, chasing down broken links, all that stuff. It's exhausting.
So much time wasted.
It's such a time drain. I've definitely been there, and it's beyond frustrating. You want to be creating valuable content, not wrestling with software glitches.
Right. The takeaway here, I think, is to document those workarounds,
Okay?
track that time wasted, and then you can present it to management and use it as ammunition to justify, investing in better tools, show them the tangible cost of, these inefficiencies.
It's about making that strong business case, right?
Exactly.
For investing in the tools and resources that enable technical writers to, do their best work.
Absolutely. Now, this next sign, I think, cuts deep. It's the feeling that management doesn't understand your role.
Yeah.
You're left out of key decisions, your contributions are minimized, and it's like you're just there to make the books look pretty.
Oh, that phrase.
I know, right?
It's so dismissive of the critical role that technical writers play
It is.
in the success of a product.
And the article encourages us to push back against that perception, advocate for inclusion, in planning meetings, product discussions, and emphasize how your early input can save everyone headaches down the road.
It's about demonstrating the value of that user-centric perspective, right?
Yes,
Which is often missing from those engineering-focused conversations.
exactly.
Technical writers are the voice of the user in a lot of ways,
They are.
making sure that the documentation meets their needs and helps them, really get the most out of the product.
Absolutely. And now the final sign is perhaps the most demoralizing, and that's lack of management support. It's that's how we've always done it attitude.
Yeah.
That can make you feel so stuck and undervalued.
Like you're hitting a brick wall.
Yeah.
I think we've all been there at some point.
Yeah. But the author actually throws out a question that's really worth pondering.
Okay.
If your manager doesn't value your work, why are you still there?
That's a powerful question.
It is.
It really makes you kind of take stock of your situation.
It does. And I think this first batch of signs from the article, it's eye-opening.
It is.
It really highlights just how pervasive the issue of documentation as an afterthought truly is.
Yeah.
But the good news is there are things we can do to change the narrative.
These 7 signs, they really paint a vivid picture of, what it's like to work in an environment where documentation is an afterthought.
Yeah, and it's not just about individual frustrations. It has ripple effects throughout the entire organization.
Right, like it impacts everyone.
Exactly. When documentation is neglected, everybody suffers. Think about it. The users, they're struggling to understand the product. The support teams are flooded with, questions that could have been avoided.
Right.
And ultimately, it can even damage the company's reputation.
It's true. It's like a domino effect. It starts with something that seems kind of minor, but it ultimately impacts the bottom line.
Exactly. So, given the potential consequences, how can technical writers advocate for themselves and for, the importance of their work in these situations?
Yeah, it's a good question.
It boils down to communication. Don't suffer in silence. Talk to your colleagues, share your experiences, brainstorm solutions together.
Yeah.
When you present a united front, it amplifies your voice, and it shows that, these concerns are widespread.
It's not just you complaining.
Exactly. It's not about complaining. It's about presenting solutions.
Right.
And, the article stresses that it's crucial to demonstrate to management how investing in documentation can actually save time and money in the long run.
Yeah, makes sense.
Highlight the cost of errors, the time wasted on those pesky workarounds, the potential hit to the company's bottom line if the documentation is subpar. Frame it as a business decision.
Okay, so it's not just about, asking for, a better chair, whatever. It's really about connecting those dots between good documentation and, positive business outcomes.
Exactly. The article also emphasizes the need for technical writers to be proactive.
Okay.
Take ownership of the documentation process, even when it feels like, others are neglecting it.
So what does that look like in practice?
That's where, creating that documentation plan we talked about earlier comes into play.
Right.
Even if it's not officially requested, having a clear roadmap, it shows initiative and it gives you a framework for, discussions with stakeholders. It's about being the solution, not just pointing out the problems.
Yeah, it's about, kind of taking the reins a little bit.
Exactly. Demonstrating professionalism and a commitment to quality, even when, things around you feel a bit chaotic.
Right. The article also touched on something that really resonated with me. How important it is to be seen as more than just the person who makes the books look pretty.
Oh, I know. That's a constant battle.
It is, right?
The battle against that misconception.
It's like, come on.
Exactly. We need to educate others about the multifaceted nature of technical writing.
Right.
It's not just about grammar and formatting. It's about truly understanding complex technical concepts and translating them into language that anyone can grasp.
It's about, anticipating the needs of your audience and making sure that the information is not only accurate, but truly helpful.
It's a form of user advocacy.
It is, yeah.
And that user-centric perspective is incredibly valuable, in planning meetings and product discussions.
Oh, for sure.
Technical writers can bring a unique perspective to the table by highlighting potential usability issues and advocating for changes that improve the overall user experience.
So it's about, kind of inserting ourselves, making sure that we have a seat at the table when those decisions are being made.
Exactly, you got it. And, this article, it doesn't sugarcoat the challenges, but there's a real sense of hope woven throughout.
Oh, yeah.
It empowers technical writers to make a difference, even in, environments where documentation may be an afterthought.
Yeah, there's definitely a call to action, I think,
There is.
a reminder that we have the power to shape the perception of our work.
We do.
It's not always going to be easy, but by being persistent, creative, and willing to speak up, we can elevate the importance of, clear, concise, user-friendly documentation.
It's a mission worth fighting for, wouldn't you say?
I think so, for sure. This deep dive has been, incredibly thought-provoking. It's given us a lot to consider, both, individually and as a community of technical writers.
Yeah, we've unpacked those 7 warning signs that, indicate documentation might be an afterthought in your workplace.
Right.
We've explored, those negative consequences that can unfold when documentation is neglected. And, we've started to kind of brainstorm strategies for advocating for our work and promoting, a more documentation-friendly culture.
Yeah, it's clear that, even in environments where documentation might not be top of mind, technical writers can still have a significant impact.
Absolutely.
It all starts with, recognizing the signs, communicating effectively, and taking those proactive steps to demonstrate our value.
Remember, you're not alone in this journey. There's a whole community of technical writers out there, facing similar challenges and striving to elevate the importance of documentation.
Right.
Connect with your peers, share your experiences, learn from each other. There's strength in numbers.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into when the docs are an afterthought. We hope this exploration has given you some valuable insights and actionable takeaways to apply in your own work.
Definitely. A big thank you to Curt Robbins for suggesting this incredibly relevant topic, and thanks to all of you for joining us.